were located in the brain in the head, and they were associated with complex electrical impulses and chemical interactions. The brain also controls our nervous and muscular systems. Recent research is still trying to locate specific and general functional areas in the brain, but we still know very little. Most of the work is still to be done. So the in-view is where we begin to fill in the information which has not been filled in the first two stages. Now, it's very important at this point not to waste time on those areas which give you particular difficulty. You simply make a note of them and pass on. Well, the reason for passing on is that if you do pass on, you're going to get information from the other side of that difficulty, so that when you return to it, it will be solvable in context of the information around it, and often, therefore, easier to solve. It also gives your mind a chance to mull over that information and perhaps come up with a solution itself. In other words, you allow your mind to work creatively on the problem for a little while. Now, also in the in-view, you prepare to take notes. You don't actually take them because you don't really know all the information yet. You prepare, and you do this by marking in the margin. So, for example, you might mark with a straight line in the margin an area that you thought was worthy of note. You might have a more wriggled or curvy line for an area that was giving you difficulty to which you wish to return. You could have question marks for areas you wanted to question, exclamation marks for things you thought were particularly notable. Now, it's important here not to worry about ruining the book by using a pencil. If your pencil lead is soft enough, and if your eraser is a good one, you'll find that the damage is less than simply by turning the pages with your finger and thumb. So you carry on marking in the margins that information which you think is important. So now we come to the final review stage. Now remember that in the in-view I told you not to get bogged down in particular problems. Leave them, come back to them later. Take the example of building a jigsaw puzzle can be compared to the learning process. When you come to a difficult piece, put it to the side, wait for later, and carry on building up your pattern as you go. Another difficult piece, put it to the side. As the pattern develops and other difficult pieces are discarded, the general form begins to take shape. And those difficult pieces fit in easily. After the structure of information has completed itself, you're prepared at your review stage now to take notes, and I'll use an example here of the study we've been involved with, the location of the mind. We might start by having a dotted line to indicate that long time period when nothing really happened at all. So we put hundreds of thousands of years. So basically we didn't know anything about it. Our next section might be the Greeks. Now we can give them a bit of color and dimension. And from there, we would add the important sections in the Greek area. Now we might, for example, have the various famous people, the Greek philosophers. So we'd have Plato. And Plato was in fact famous for his wax tablet hypothesis, which said that the mind was like a wax tablet. Experience was written on it, and time gradually eroded it. So here you just might have a little symbol of Plato's wax tablet. We would then have the other philosophers, which would include Parmenides, Aristotle, and a host of others. Now again, we can give these a bit more coding. For Aristotle, we know that he centered in the heart many of the areas which we now know to be in the brain, so we give him a little heart. And for Parmenides, with his fluids, and the others, for example, with spirits, we could have a little impression of a spirit and some indication of fluids. And when we completed this section on the Greeks, we could map that whole area off. Now the Greeks would be followed by the Dark Ages, and here we can again symbolize a black center, the Dark Ages. Now, one of the only rays of light in the Dark Ages was a philosopher called Galen. He was a religious philosopher who basically accepted the ideas of Aristotle, so we can have an arrow. And Galen's ideas were in turn accepted by the church and stated as church dogma. So we have religion. And they were accepted so strongly that little progress was made. So again, we circle off this particular area. Now after that we come to the 16th, 17th, 18th century, the Renaissance. And here once again we have a series of particularly influential characters. Now perhaps prime among those was Newton. And of course there were all the others. Now at this particular stage in history, it was discovered that the mind was concerned with electrical impulses and with chemical interactions. So again, we could have a small symbol for that. Electrical impulses and something for chemical interactions. And again, this area can be circled off, perhaps here in a different color. Now, another point about this was that in this time period, it was finally confirmed that most of the thought processes were located in the brain. So we can have an arrow from this whole section back to our center. Now, our final section will be the modern thought. And here, there are a number of ways you could choose. You might decide to branch it off by country or area. So we could have the USSR, United States of America, Europe, and all the other areas. Now from this, we could branch off again noting those researchers who were particularly important. And from them, again, we can have arrows going into the center showing those particular areas of the brain that they're concerned with. And on those arrows, you could print the appropriate information. And once again, this area can be circled. Now, at this stage, you've actually completed your application section of study. Your final notes are made. The information is all there as you wish to have it. And in fact, this looks like a brain pattern itself. But I want now to go back and look at the overall picture of the application section. We've completed it, but during the process, it's important that a number of things continue to be done. Now, the first one of these, of course, is the use of the visual guide. And this is done throughout the process. And I want to explain briefly here why it's so important to use a visual guide. If you wanted to look at this particular graph, your eye does not slide down it. It takes in the information in chunks, 3, and then goes off and looks at the information underneath. So the graph of your eye movement would be down, down,